All right. Welcome everyone to today's technical webinar for the unpacking of the Grazing Land Management methodology, ENVOMARK Assured and approved under the Australasian Catchment Water Improvement Standard. I'd like to thank you all so much for your time today. Apologies for the late start. However, we just want to make sure we had plenty of people in the room. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country and acknowledge their continuing connection to land, waters and community. We pay respect to country, the people, the cultures and the elders past and present. So I'm Amy Bassnett. I'm the Head of Programs for Eco Markets Australia. We are Australia's first independent administrator of natural capital credit markets. Today, we're going to be blessed by a number of fantastic speakers, including Andrew Yates from Verterra Engineering and Julia Waite from Meat and Livestock Australia, as well as Eco Markets' very own CEO, Gozlik Shepers. So our agenda for today will be running through the independent market administration and launch of the GLM, so the work that went behind the approval process. Andrew will be providing a great overview of the unpacking of the methodology itself. Julia will be giving an update on Meat and Livestock Australia, and Gozlik will be running through the demand drivers and the market context. We'll end with a Q&A, so please make sure that you use the Q&A function. And we'll obviously get to as many questions that we can. For those that we don't, we can always get back to those following the meeting. Today's webinar will be recorded and we'll make that available through our website and through our partners' websites. So let's get stuck in. So Eco Markets Australia, as I said, we are an independent administrator of natural capital credit markets. We're globally recognised for our reef credit scheme and our cassowary credit scheme, and we're very busy at the moment launching our water and biodiversity markets to be at an Australasian level. But in focusing on what natural capital credits are, I believe many of us in the room know a lot about these things. But in terms of what Eco Markets offers, we have credits which are issued for measurable nature improvements that have already been achieved. Our credits can be sold to companies under ESG and offset schemes. We align with international best practice, and what we've been very excited about through our reef credit scheme is that we've seen both state and federal approval and endorsement of reef credits as bona fide offsets for both fine sediment and dissolved inorganic nitrogen in the Great Barrier Reef catchments. This really demonstrates our ENVOMARK, which is our assured integrity, and this represents scientific rigour, data transparency and high integrity. Our credits accumulate over defined periods and can be sold separately or aggregated. And so our ENVOMARK Assured Integrity is delivered through our value nature framework. This involves our standards such as the reef credits, and today what we're talking about is the Australasian Catchment Water Improvement Standard, which the Grazing Land Management methodology has been approved under. Our standards are the rules for each market and what qualifies and how it's measured. Our methodologies provide the detailed for achieving environmental outcomes and any activities relating to that. So any appropriately skilled individual or group can develop methods which then face peer review and public consultation before approval. This process is overseen by a technical advisory committee of some of the best scientists and economists across Australia, which I'm very proud of. Our projects are the on-ground activities where landholders and proponents implement environmental outcomes under approved methodologies with regular monitoring verified by independent auditors. Our credits are issued only after this verification confirms the environmental outcomes have been achieved and recorded on our soon-to-be blockchain-enabled registry, and I'll talk a bit more about that soon. And this provides the complete transparency and traceability for those credits. So Eco Markets Australia's integrity guardrails, this is what our value nature framework is built upon and incorporated throughout our methods and our standards. This requires outcomes to be third-party audited and verified for things such as leakage, risk of reversal, permanence and additionality to be incorporated and dealt for and calculated for, with environmental outcomes linked to real and verifiable improvements, so they're measurable, and independently administered by Eco Markets Australia, with those credits, as I said, managed through our blockchain registry. So our Acwis, which I'll refer is the Australasian Catchment Water Improvement Standard, I'll refer to that as Acwis from now on, is part of our integrated suite of ENVOMARK standards. This will soon sit alongside our Australasian Biodiversity Improvement Standard, which is set to launch in September. The opportunity here is that it enables methodologies to deliver multiple benefits, so that you can stack both water and biodiversity as well as carbon on the same parcel, dealing for additionality. We have a Care for Country standard, which is under development at the moment. This is a First Nations-led standard which rewards contribution to culture. This is a really exciting opportunity, and if you'd like to hear any more about these, please feel free to reach out to Eco Markets after the event today. And we're also looking at a greenhouse gas carbon standard coming soon, and this will enable our ENVOMARK Assured integrity across an integrated suite of standards which can deliver multiple benefits for projects. So this will be backed by our new registry to launch in September. This will be fully blockchain enabled. It will enable electronic methodology policies on a Verterra Guardian platform. It's internationally aligned, and at the moment we're testing the minimum viable product. This is a transition from our current S&P registry to Novatech come August. So proponents will be active in this new registry from the end of August to be able to play and work out what some potential issues might be and to solve for those. And the official launch will be the 22nd of September at our Abyss launch event. This will involve a new fee structure, no significant shift, and the formal details will be shared once we are more on top of what those things will be. So in regards to what our current methodologies are under the Reef Credit Scheme, we have our nitrogen use efficiency, gully rehabilitation, wastewater and grazing land management. Andrew will talk more about how the GLM methodology has gone under revision to come into the under the Acwis and now applicable Australia-wide. But this is a really exciting opportunity where, as I've said before, we're seeing our ENVOMARK credits endorsed by state and federal for offsets, and the GLM methodology under the Acwis will also play a role in that space. We currently have 14 registered projects, 2 pipeline projects and several in development, and we're seeing about 10,000 credits issued onto our registry each year. So the Acwis, this was built on the success of the Reef Credit Scheme. It's a framework for ENVOMARK water improvement within defined catchment settings across Australasia. It sets the rules and requirements that must be satisfied to develop projects and methods, and encourages First Nations peoples in design and implementation of the methods and projects. We've also incorporated sustainable development goals into this reporting, and the scheme can be used to develop, buy and sell credits for both voluntary and compliance purposes. Getting on to the exciting part of today, the Grazing Land Management methodology. This has been ENVOMARK Assured and approved under this Acwis standard. The independent market administration component ensures transparency and governance. It upholds the scheme integrity, ensures eligibility and alignment with the Acwis. And this is through our project application review procedure, validation of those projects and registration, as well as the verification and monitoring period reports. We issue these credits through a certification and issuance onto our ENVOMARK blockchain registry, and that credit tracking will occur, as I've mentioned. And what's really exciting is that we've been notified by the Clean Energy Regulator that the Grazing Land Management methodology has been approved to stack with soil carbon. This is a fantastic outcome for the scheme, and I want to say a huge thank you to Verterra, MLA, AgriProve, and Kate, our project officer here at Eco Markets Australia, who've worked tirelessly to get this outcome. So a huge thank you to the Clean Energy Regulator. This aligns with under our cassowary credit scheme. Our rainforest replanting method was approved to stack with the Mallee EP planting. So it just goes to demonstrate the application of the ENVOMARK as this assured integrity at this federal level. So what has happened? The GLM went through peer review, public consultation, methodology revision, and the TAC recommendation, which resulted in board approval. So this is a great outcome. I did want to just note that this is a voluntary market participation. Statutory declarations of project intent are provided as part of project application. However, there are no notes on title and no locking up of land indefinitely. ENVOMARK credits are only issued for outcomes achieved, not projected, and non-compliance and compliance is incorporated into the methodology, and we can provide more information about that if requested. So I just wanted to quickly finish with, before I hand over to Andrew from Verterra, is that we do have an ENVOMARK project application and review procedure available. So for anyone who wants to engage in the grazing land management methodology and partake in this fantastic partnership on offer, which Andrew and Julia will talk more about, to develop some pilot projects, we can provide the process applicable for that, and we can go through that in more detail with you offline. So I'd like to hand over to Andrew, and thank you very much for coming today.
Oh, thanks so much, Amy, and welcome everybody. I guess I'd like to just start off by saying I probably do have too many slides here for the 10 minutes that's been allocated to me. So I do encourage people after the fact to reach out if they want more information and they want to kind of discuss a little bit further. But as Amy said in the introduction, I'm Andrew Yates from Verterra. There's a couple of other Verterra people here. Kind of shout out to Ben Silverwood, who's sitting here as well, who really was the driving force behind writing the GLM method. And there's a few others here as well to to support me. Anyway, so my presentation is more about the methodology itself. And hopefully how we're actually going to be able to enable projects. So it's a grazing land management method, we call it. It was initially developed for reef credits. It's still available, adapted to Acwis, so it's now available Australia-wide. There are some slight differences between the reef credit and the Acwis kind of methodology, but the modelling and the calculations attached to them are essentially the same. So the methodology, it's scientifically robust, and it's designed to deliver water quality outcomes through improved grazing land management. It was developed by Verterra. It had some initial input from AgriProve and Green Collar for the reef side of things. As you said, adapted to Acwis. And so what the methodology does is it recognises the opportunity to be rewarded for positive improvements to water quality within Australia. We can adapt it to New Zealand. The methodology can actually be adapted to anywhere in the world the way that it works. Under Acwis, we can go to New Zealand as well if there's any interest there. Essentially, what the methodology does is it links ground cover improvement to a reduction in erosion, and it quantifies the prevention of fine sediment flowing into waterways. The little graphic kind of explains it. Grazing practice changes aim to increase your ground cover. It improves your soil health, improves soil infiltration, which results in reduced erosion and improved water quality, which we can quantify and turn into a credit. Hopefully I do have control, Amy, because it's not moved on to the next slide. I'll try this button. Yeah. So in terms of the method itself, it is a modelled approach. It uses remote sensing data and technology. And we use two main kind of components to the method. One is using the universal soil loss equation, and the other one is dynamic reference cover modelling. I've got a slide on each of those. There are things up front that I have to say that aren't eligible for the methodology, because this comes up quite often in conversation. Any form of irrigation, broad scale clearing of woody vegetation, and any activities identified as excluded under the relevant standards are the main exclusions. But aside from that, grazing country in Australia, areas are available for participation. So the method measures real outcomes. Every time that the model runs, it quantifies your sediment savings, what have been achieved, and there's no reversal on that. Once a sediment saving has been achieved, it can be credited, and you never actually have to kind of pay that back, because a sediment has been prevented from going into your waterways. There are obviously additional kind of benefits. What we can actually do through the methodology is, and the products that it produces, particularly around the spatial maps, is we can isolate where on your property that erosion is most active, and so you can actually target your interventions, which has got positive benefits for your productivity and your property, your natural capital, but as well as targeting your interventions to maximise the amount of credits that you might be able to generate. And as Amy said, it does align well with soil carbon improvements, and it does now allow landholders to stack outcomes, if that's a pathway that they want to go through. I mentioned the two main components of the methodology, one being the universal soil loss equation. This is where we start to get into a bit of the technical side of things of the technical webinar. The universal soil loss equation is widely used. It came out of the States in the 1950s, and has been used and modified kind of various times kind of since then. The Australian and Queensland government both use the universal soil loss equation, when they work in this space, and so it's nothing new. What the USLE essentially does is it has various factors, and each of those factors contribute to the level of erosion that might occur. This graphic explains it well. You've got energy into the system, which is your rainfall. It's your rainfall intensity, which actually creates the energy to enable erosion to occur. Once that energy is in the system, you've got factors that actually affect what happens to that energy, and the LNS is your slope and your slope length. Either slow it down or speed it up, and add or subtract that energy to the system. How erodible are your soils? And this is the lever that we can pull, is how your vegetation cover actually protects the soil. That's your ground cover. That's the factor that we're trying to influence the most during this methodology. And how your interventions kind of stop the sediment, and when that's all multiplied out, you get your erosion, which is a tonnes per hectare per year. The methodology also uses dynamic reference cover modelling. This was actually key in the development of the methodology, and it solved a big problem for us, in that we only want to reward credits for grazing practice change. We don't want people to be credited for climatic variability. Starting a project when it's dry, you go to a wet season, your ground cover increases, kind of less erosion. Credits need to be rewarded for people's interventions for their activities, and the dynamic reference cover modelling does that. It does get really technical. This is going to be brief. It is kind of hard to explain in a very, very short period of time, but essentially what it does is remote sensing data. We look at what's happening within a kind of a 10-kilometre radius of your property, and the methodology then asks you to select the pixels which are the least disturbed, either by grazing or fire or what other kind of disturbance can occur across the landscape. The idea of that is it kind of creates a benchmark of what's best possible for that region, and then the project is compared to those reference pixels, which ultimately act as a control point, and that difference then becomes a baseline. And then as you undertake your project, if you can improve your ground cover and make kind of gains, kind of get closer to what that baseline is, well, then you've kind of created that gain and that benefit. Those numbers are then kind of put back into the RUSLE. Might be easier to explain when I get to a couple of these slides. So this is a couple of outputs. This is a property that we've looked at, and basically what the methodology does is it looks at your ground cover during your baseline period. For reef credits, that's from 2017, so it's kind of 9 years at the moment. For Acwis, it's a 10-year ground cover baseline, which goes up and down with your seasons and your years as well. You then undertake a project, and what the methodology does and guides people through is use your 10-year baseline for ground cover to create a model of what would your ground cover look like under a business as usual scenario, which is this red line down here. But you undertake your project and the ground cover's improved, and so you've got an improvement in ground cover from your historical baseline, and that improvement then is fed into the RUSLE to track what's happening with your soil movement. This is a graph on the same property over the same period of time, and this is the erosion on that property during the baseline period. The project starts, the methodology asks you to develop a model of what would occur again under a business as usual scenario, which looks like this red line here. What erosion actually occurred is down there, and so the difference between those curves is your sediment savings and what actually can then be credited. Hopefully that makes some sense. And as I said, if not, reach out. We've got a far more comprehensive presentation that we can supply that explains how this works. I'll fly through this very quickly. By integrating Acwis with reef credits, this slide just shows you what the differences between the GLM methods for the standards are. RUSLE doesn't change, dynamic reference pixels don't change, but what changes is your fine sediment proportion, a slight change in ground cover inputs, a temporal change in modelling. We've gone to seasonal for Acwis from monthly for reef credits. Acwis includes a hill slope delivery ratio. Most of the changes are attributed to differences in data sources. There's a lot of data in the reef space because it's been a kind of a priority for water quality in Australia. And so access to that data is kind of pretty sweet as method developers. Not as much data at Australia-wide level. So we actually had to change some of the data source updates for Acwis. A little bit more field work required to collect data under Acwis than reef credits is actually also resulted, which is your soil erodibility. Baseline periods changed a little bit, and there's actually also a change in the what we're calling the benefit attenuation factors. The methodology calculates sediment savings and soil movement at the farm gate, but how much of that sediment then reaches the asset of concern is actually an important part of the methodology and calculations. They're done slightly different for reef and GLM. I do have a slide on the benefit attenuation factor for Acwis. I won't kind of go through it into a lot of detail, but there is essentially an option to pick up anything that's actually already in play in that system, through a water quality improvement plan. The reef space, there's a delivery ratio, that's provided. That's option one, that's provided. Option two then goes to a default option, which you can then apply. Which kind of brings me to the methodologies being approved. It's been kind of peer reviewed. It's available now. We don't own any IP around that. It's available for anybody to use. But to test it, to prove it, we're actually lucky enough to now be working with the MLA to try and run a couple of pilot projects. So we want to pilot reef credit, we want to pilot Acwis, and we want to pilot a water quality and soil methodology together. We're also partnered with AgriProve, to really focus on that stacking opportunity. So there's multiple opportunities there, and please reach out to us. Pilot program benefits. Basically it's going to be kind of fully funded to de-risk participation for those initial landholders, that are interested. And so you get technical insights by working with Verterra, AgriProve, where they're being stacked, and I guess you'd be the first to to put your hand up and help us show what's possible. I know I'm kind of probably running out of time a little bit. We've got case studies. Visit our websites if you want to kind of go through that and learn more. Last slide, last thing to mention is the methodology is very, very data intense and very, very data heavy. It requires, there's lots of calculations. So for it to actually work, we've had to codify it. Ben's done all that particular work, and that code we've actually packaged up now into a broader package of what Verterra does, and we've actually registered and trademarked Drover as that package to help deliver on the methodology. So as I said, thanks to Amy and guys at EcoMarkets Australia for actually providing the platform for us to do this. And I look forward to using the methodology now and actually kind of getting some projects and creating some meaningful impact actually out on the ground. So
Thanks, Andrew.
Hand over to Julia.
Thank you. Great to be here. My name's Julia Waite. I'm the Sustainability R&D Project Manager with Meat and Livestock Australia. So MLA, for those who aren't already familiar, is a service provider to the red meat industry, covering grass-fed, grain-fed beef, sheep and goats. And the way we do this is through investing direct levies or through external co-investment, like with this project, into activities of research and development, adoption and marketing, all with the goal of boosting the productivity, performance and sustainability of the industry. So this graphic shows the true breadth and size of the commodities we represent. But in fact, approximately half of the landmass here, of Australia's landmass, is under the stewardship of red meat graziers. So with the launch of the Grazing Land Management method under Acwis, livestock producers countrywide really have a huge potential to participate in this scheme. If we zoom in a little closer to where I'm dialing in from, in Queensland, and considering the reef credit scheme, graziers account for approximately 73% or 31 million hectares of the total Great Barrier Reef catchment area. So that really sort of gives an idea of why we're interested in supporting the expansion and piloting of the first grazing land management projects under this scheme. So why sort of MLA come on board at this point? Well, MLA is very interested to see what we learn from this pilot, mostly because of our commitment to improving natural capital, productivity, and increasing opportunities for producers to be recognised for a diverse suite of environmental credentials, not just some of the ones that come to mind, but really looking at some other markets that could meet producers at their risk appetite or their on-farm goals where they're at. So why we've come on board is we want to increase awareness of this new environmental opportunity. It's safe to say that I've learned a lot over the last 6 months working with Verterra and EcoMarkets Australia, and I think we're in a really exciting position to see what the potential impact could be on grazing properties. The case studies we're looking to develop through this 3-year pilot will hopefully give us some answers about how water quality improvement can also benefit farm performance, the key industries that we're invested in, and also what the potential could be around water credits, be that reef or Acwis, and I guess, the value that they have for certain players in the economy. It's always important that if we're investing in our business and investing in something novel, I think it's important that producers are recognised for that investment, and some of these schemes offer a pathway to do that. And really, lastly, I'd like to touch on the fact that we are running a rolling expressions of interest for landholders. I think, Andrew, I'm happy to be corrected, but I think we'd really love to hear from people location agnostic. We certainly would like to know who's interested in this scheme. And then from there, I think the key criteria is two things for me. One is that you're willing to participate and collaborate in a demonstration project where we'd hope to engage other landholders to come together and learn from your experience. The second key thing is that you would be willing to explore an on-farm practice change additional to what you already might be doing to support ground cover and help support the reduction in sediment runoff that is ultimately the main game of the GLM project. So I know we'll post the link for anyone looking to explore that expressions of interest, but I also know that Andrew and his team are very open for a more tailored conversation. If you're not sure it's right for you, we'd be happy to support.
Yeah. Thanks for mentioning that, Julia. It's not limited to 3 pilots. I mean, yeah, we want 3 pilots through the MLA, but we are interested in going well beyond that. So yeah, respond to the expression of interest. Just reach out kind of directly to us or any other project proponent out there, and have a conversation.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Julia. So that brings me to the last section. I'm going to re-G up everyone to think about questions that they've got. We've got a number of them in the Q&A section already, so that should be a good discussion. This section is really to describe a little bit more around why the market context is important. Really, fundamentally, eco-markets exists in order to quantify environmental outcomes and make those outcomes available to others to claim. And when they claim that, they're actually providing new revenue streams to people who are undertaking environmental outcome projects. Now, we specifically need this because the government funding of environmental repair is not sufficient to keep up with where the environment is heading and where it currently sits. So it's an important new revenue stream for landowners and others. And that's why you've heard a lot about the rigour that exists underneath the methodology that was developed. Thank you very much, Andrew and Verterra. And it's important that we have people like Meat and Livestock Australia who are championing and making people aware of these opportunities on land. So thank you to both of those as well for participation. Before I start, it is Meanjin where I'm presenting, and so I just want to pay my quick respects to the traditional owners of the land in which I'm presenting this time, and it turns out that probably Julia and Amy and Andrew also. So the Turrbal and Yugara people are the original owners of this land, and continue their continued stewardship over the land is important. Furthermore, I think it's pretty well recognised, or is recognised by me, that they are still the first environmental stewards that we had on this land. So we welcome any contribution that they might make going forward as well. So markets are interesting. They're a little bit different to funding an activity on land. They're built around risk and how we manage risk. In particular, de-risking the delivery of an environmental outcome is what's quantified under an ENVOMARK credit. Now that's important because corporate and investment work predominantly in, around, and they manage and understand risk. So it's not surprising that we're using language that sort of corresponds with the investment language. And emerging markets, when you first start in this space, like our markets and others, they are inherently risky. So attracting capital into those markets is somewhat harder. Normally, with my background in venture capital, high risk means high return. And so what we're also looking for is to ensure that when people invest in nature outcomes, they're getting the best integrity in those credits that they possibly can get. And that reduces part of the risk of what they're trying to invest in. So when you buy an ENVOMARK reef credit, it's effectively a de-risked asset compared to an activity that you might fund on land. It's de-risked because the outcome is already achieved. It's de-risked because you've got a group like EcoMarkets checking over the shoulder of Verterra and Meat and Livestock Australia to make sure that it's a verifiable outcome. So there's a reputational risk that is reduced by being able to make the claim. It's also, you've got to have very confidence in what you're claiming. And so that's the diligence that goes into the methodology, the metric, how you're achieving it, what are you measuring. I thought the presentation today, Andrew, on the baselining was really important. I think it's only touching the surface of the complexity that goes into baselining, and it's a discussion we have on a regular basis. But it's fundamental to be able to claim that you are making a meaningful contribution to an improvement in natural outcomes. And that's what companies need to be able to buy. It's not good enough just to make a report on activities that are run anymore. You'll have a look under ESG and others. The other piece that I wanted to touch on today is the evolution of how nature credits comes about and how we think we're going to fund them. Currently, environmental repair is predominantly funded by grants for activities, mainly through government. Right, so if we think about $220 billion is spent per year on nature repair, that's predominantly all government funding. Right, actually only about $20 billion is spent from corporates. So we are at a massive disadvantage when it comes to how much corporate investment is coming into nature. So as we move from government grants for activities, we're trying to encourage grants for outcomes. And the reason that's important because it aligns objectives. The grants are there to fund towards getting an outcome, and the recipient of those grants is incentivized to get to an outcome because that's what they're paying for. Once you make that switch to an outcomes-based model, you can actually raise a fund for outcomes. So that's where a contribution is made into a project and a share of the outcome credits is then shared with the original fund itself. That's something that EcoMarkets is working on at the moment, and stay tuned for some further news on that in the future, hopefully. Finally, the reason we're doing all of this is because actually what we want is to attract some further investment, and preferably corporate investment, and ideally something like superannuation investment. Once you can start unlocking institutional investment, the amount of money that can come into corporate to environmental outcome repairs is vastly superior to what you'll find through government alone. So that's why we're trying to make this transition from grants for activities towards a focus on outcomes, and then a diligent outcome-based model that is reflected in increased value based on the risk taken out of the program. We often get asked under the credit landscape, if you're taking the risk to make these credits and you're waiting for someone to buy them, which is functionally how it works, who's going to buy them and where do we manage that? Well, we can tell you that there is a global push that says that telling a story about your contribution to nature without the rigor that sits behind it is really no longer acceptable. So a simple ESG conversation about how you funded a particular project really doesn't cut it at the very top end level. We also see that legislation is moving much more towards accounting for impact and using outcomes as that measurement unit for accounting for impact. So that flavour is coming into the big corporate environment as well. Both of those two, a shift away from just reporting a story versus reporting on outcomes, drives a need to buy credits. I think we're spending a lot of time emphasising the fact that the outcome that you achieve is far superior to the activity that you've run. And I can tell you, for a company who has an environmental risk, the only thing they probably care about is the outcome, because it's the outcome that is the risk to their business. So we're sort of moving towards the fact that credits represent the best currency for accounting for environmental outcomes, which are important for those top three drivers as well. In the terms of market drivers for buying credits, just to close out this conversation, you have a stick-based market, which is very much around what you legislatively required to do, and mandatory purchases of carbon credits fit into that scenario. For instance, nature's not there yet. There is accounting for your impact through offsets and that's a marketplace that currently exists where nature credits are used. There's greater reporting requirements under TNFD and global frameworks, and there we're also seeing credits being used to report on your quantifiable contribution to nature. All of those are predominantly stick, but there are some carrot markets. Obviously, a risk assessment, that's entirely carrot. You're encouraged to do that for your own profitability purposes, but it's your choice. And similarly, corporate culture and corporate social responsibility is entirely a carrot-based approach. We can see that ENVOMARK credits actually are used in 3 of those 4 categories, with risk assessment emerging at the moment. So we would encourage people to think about how they are using credits and why companies might be interested in buying them. They're a very convenient, simple and accurate reporting mechanism for all of those 4. I won't go into this slide too much, apart from to say that I think there's a significant amount of government advocacy required to ensure that we get a demand driver that can persist over a long period of time. If you want somewhere between the stick and the carrot demand drivers, like your offset market and your reporting in market, that requires quite a lot of advocacy. And we've been doing quite a lot of that with the federal government and the state governments as to how they can consider using nature credits as the currency for managing offsets in particular. I won't go into detail around this. It's specifically around creating a streamlined approval pathway for corporates that choose to use a credit project or buy credits off the shelf as a mechanism to account for their impact. And in short summary, we're proposing that if a company takes responsibility for their impact by defining their impact in terms of credit metrics, and then sources the credits from Verterra and others, right, in advance of their application, they deserve a streamlined approval pathway. Because the current approach is that you provide your application, you talk about any impact you might have, you either pay the fine that the government tells you you need to pay, or you present a mechanism that you believe accounts for your impact. We think there's a much more codified, structured mechanism that can be used in this space if environmental credits are adopted within what we call a risk-adjusted offset hierarchy. Happy to have a conversation with anyone after the fact as to how this might work and implementing that. So with that technicality done in some of the markets, we'll open up to questions. There were some questions on whether or not the slides would be presented. This is fully recorded, and so the video and the dialogue will be presented on our website and also, I believe, on Meat Livestock Australia website. So the first question I'll talk to is from Lachlan. There's a question on project aggregation, whether grouping a range of smaller projects can achieve the same scale efficiencies, something similar to the carbon market. Andrew, I'm going to ask you to comment on that in particular, whether you've got experience in that space and what your expectations would be.
Look, yeah, thanks, guys, and thanks for the question. Look, it is entirely possible, but I will kind of preface that or kind of put caveats around that is if it's multiple landholders kind of involved in one kind of project, yeah, they all still need to meet the requirements of the standard. So the legal rights, the additionalities, you know, each of those, you know, I guess properties would need a grazing practice, yeah, change or GLM plan, yeah, to describe, yeah, additionality. The same level of soil sampling, yeah, will be required. Yeah, and each of those properties will require a rain gauge. We have set this up, you know, purposely. It's actually to answer another question around cost estimates of running the methodology. We have very consciously tried to make it as cheap as possible, yeah, in terms of those front end costs. But there's just some things you can't get away from. It's not yeah, massively capital intensive like environmental planting or something like that, where there's large upfront costs, but there are some on the back end of it. Yeah, unfortunately, well, fortunately, there will be some audit costs. That third party independent audit is critical, you know, to validate the the changes and the outcome. And that will be a cost, you know, before credits are issued. So yes, we can aggregate, but all those same requirements and steps still need to be met. There will be efficiencies, in terms of whoever goes out and assists with the development of the grazing land management plans can do 3 or 4 in one mobilisation. Same for the soil sampling and the installation of any rain gauges if that's needed. So there will be some cost efficiencies.
So there is a benefit of getting your neighbouring farm to join you in doing this thing.
Absolutely. And look, and part of our interest in stacking with soil carbon is the same. Soil carbon requires some sampling. The GLM method also requires some sampling. So collect the various samples under one mobilisations, and you kind of create some efficiencies that way. Perfect.
Amy, I'm coming to you. So Sue's asked a technical question about the scheme. It says, can farmers who have implemented historical improvements in ground cover secure credits? For example, if a farmer changed grazing land practices 20 years ago on the ground, can they still get a credit?
Yes. But again, there's a but attached to it. The baseline period is 10 years. So if they've been doing really good practice for the last 10 years or 20 years, what can they do beyond that? Can it be taken kind of any further? It's those further changes from project registration, which is going to be kind of captured. So there's definite, if somebody's been doing practice change, regen ag, or trying to invest in the natural capital of their property, say for the last 2 years, well, you still got a 10-year baseline period. Those 2 years will absolutely be kind of captured, in your ground cover improvements, but that will be averaged out with the other 8. So it is what more can you potentially do, and it is a matter of timing as well.
Excellent. So it is actually in response to a new activity as well.
Correct.
So Amy, I have a question for you. It's from Vince. The question is not necessarily specific to grazing land management, but more to the scheme. Is there a way to integrate increased canopy cover into the accounting for this method? That is, planted riparian areas, capturing fine sediment and reducing energy intensity coming into the system. So it's beyond just changing your grazing practice.
Thanks, guys. I think the opportunity there under the Acwis is that you can have multiple methodologies aligned to deliver multiple benefits. So if you wanted to activate riparian restoration, you could also have a methodology running alongside GLM. However, if it is resulting in improved pastures, I'm sure Andrew can add to this, it can relate. Because Andrew, if you want to refer to the canopy coverage component.
Yeah, it's a good question. The GLM will pick up improvements from riparian planting, but because it is a hill slope kind of based methodology, if the canopy cover exceeds 60%, we can't actually see enough of the ground cover for that to actually be included in the models. And so that actually then gets excluded from the calculations. What we find in reality is 60% is actually really quite high. I think if somebody's doing some riparian planting, please have a chat to us because it probably will be picked up under the GLM method, and it probably will be able to quantify some sediment savings.
And just to add to that, the opportunity that we were talking to earlier about integrated suite of standards is that with our new biodiversity improvement standard coming out as well, there's opportunity to, at the beginning of a project, forward plan to think a bit more of a catchment wide or landscape farm management planning holistic overview, and what components can you incorporate from a natural capital perspective, whether it be biodiversity outcomes aligned with sediment outcomes and other water quality improvement outcomes, and deliver multiple benefits from your land parcel. So Eco Markets and Verterra are more than happy to have that conversation with anyone who's interested in holistic farm planning.
Right. So you've touched on something there, Amy, that I think is part of another question, and that is if you're claiming something different. So if you're claiming biodiversity improvements, then you need to do some amendments to the current methodology in order to do that. So you'd have a riparian version for that. Similarly, there's a question from Kylie that says, look, is there an opportunity to also claim nutrient reductions from this methodology? Because we know that nutrients and sediments are combined. Andrew, maybe you can respond to that, and Amy, add to it if you need to.
Yeah, look, in the future, we actually see that that's possible. We know that there's nutrients attached to sediment. We just haven't done that yet. So kind of internally, we have had those conversations about, whether the next versions of this that we tried to, kind of scientifically, robustly, come up with an approach to quantify, those nutrients that are attached to sediment. Unfortunately, we're not there yet. But again, like to have a conversation around that. If there's a genuine need for that, well then, we are definitely open to a conversation. I will kind of mention as well, we do have some rough numbers around it. So it's one of those ones at the moment is we can put a number to it, but is it robust enough for a credit yet? No, we need to do some more work.
And I might just add, in reference to the stacking with carbon, the Clean Energy Regulator will be providing us with a letter of formal support and approval to stack. I believe tomorrow it's coming through. And that will provide details as to the process to enable that stacking. And just to give an example, under the CASRU credit scheme, the carbon project was registered first, and then your CASRU credit project was stacked on top. So it is expected this will follow a similar format, and we'll make all that available through our website as we get that information through.
There might be a question here, I think, for Julie, and that is there a specific soil type that's targeted for the pilot? I'm not sure if that's your call or Andrew's.
That's definitely not a question for me, guys. I'm going to reflect that back onto Andrew.
Look, no, there's not. The methodology does quantify kind of fine sediment. So for Acwis, it's under 63 microns. For the reef space, it's under 20. But yeah, it does come down to what proportion of your soil has those kind of fine sediments attached to it. But no, it's not targeted to one soil type or another.
Got it. Thank you. I wonder, Andrew, if you can continue and tell us a little bit more about what you know about the monetisation of credits and the cost of implementing versus the cost of returns. Anything that you can provide on that? It's a bit of an unknown space because you don't know the value of the credits until they hit the marketplace. There's some price finding that has to happen, those sorts of things. But if you've got an estimate on, how long until you get a return on investment, rule of thumb, we have, just by background, we've seen for other methodologies in the reef, your rule of thumb is to get for easy implemented methodologies like NUE, you can get fairly immediate payback. But for some of the more complex methodologies, that can take 3-5 years before you get a return.
Yeah. Look, as you say, it is a bit of an unknown space at the moment, but the way that the methodology works is because it's codified and because it requires remote sensing data. And this is data that flies over your property every 5 days. So, so that data collection is continuous. We can run the model as frequently as needed. Under reef, we've got it as a month. For Acwis, we've moved to seasonal. Those 3 months worth of data, we can actually start kind of getting a picture. Now, I think starting getting credits after 3 months is probably too short a time frame. Because there will be those audit costs and all the upfront costs and things like that. But look, definitely after a year, it's going to be worthwhile looking as to are your changes starting to make a difference? We can actually quantify that seasonally to see how it's tracking, and based on the early results of that, then we'd be able to kind of project when it's going to be worthwhile putting in a crediting report. But I'd definitely be looking at that from get-go. And it's not just about the credits, right? You want to make sure that your grazing practice change is actually making a positive impact. As we said, the methodology looks beyond seasonality. So irrespective of what type of season you're having, we are able to track your grazing land management improvements. And we can do that kind of seasonally. So even without crediting you, we're actually able to inform you as to whether you're starting to make a positive change.
Can you comment while you're on the run, Andrew? Seems like you're in the zone. Stacking of soil carbon with this one, do you have to go through AgriProof, or are there other soil providers that you can use? Thanks, Emily.
AgriProof, we've decided to collaborate with for the MLA project, but soil carbon and the GLM method, nobody owns. They sit on standard, so anybody can use them. So yes, you can absolutely go through other providers. I mean, we'd like you to come to us, but yeah,
of course,
it's an open marketplace.
Right. Follow on. So Brett has asked a question specifically, Andrew. We're getting to really specifics regarding the baseline. Have you considered matching pixels that have behaved consistently pre-project, like pixel to pixel, rather than an intact pixel being related to a different behaving project pixel? I'll stop there.
That's a tough one. Maybe take it. It's not necessarily an easy one to answer, because there was a lot of work and a lot of effort to kind of come to where the methodologies landed to use dynamic reference pixels. That's basically come from other scientific reports that we've read, which have also been peer reviewed and trusted in science and things like that. So we've pretty much adopted what was already accepted in science as an approach to do this, with some slight kind of variations attached to it.
Yep, understood. So I'll ask that, Brett, that was Brett Kerr asking the question. Maybe there's a follow-up directly, Andrew, between you and Brett Kerr. Similarly for Dan Evans, there's a very specific question around how Russell estimates point source erosion, in particular the sediment that ultimately reaches the waterway and then the sensitive area, or the area of concern, or the icon of concern. So I might get you to follow up with Dan separately on that, and provide a response as part of the webinar. There is another nice juicy question, which is roughly what size or scale properties do you think you're looking for in the pilot?
For the pilot, look, and this is rough. It's there's kind of no limit, but we do want the pilots to actually have some nice meaningful numbers. So 1,000 hectares plus would be nice. But actually also proximity to the asset at risk. So we are very much interested in the Murray. If there's somebody who's kind of close to the Murray River rather than 500 kilometres away, we will probably prioritise them over ones that are further away from the asset. But again, look, that's just for the pilots. We do want conversations with other people, kind of beyond the pilots. We don't want to wait 3 years, work for the MLA to say, yep, this works. We want to kind of scale now.
Right. So don't be restricted just to the pilot 3. If you've got an interesting project you think you'd like to participate, definitely start the conversation now.
100%, please.
Right. So who designs your grazing land management changes? Is that in the methodology, or is that the farmer? The question's very broad to say, well, who designs this? Who's responsible?
Basically, the Grazing Land Management Plan needs, there are some requirements in it, but it is actually all about additionality, what you're going to do beyond business as usual to increase ground cover. That can be the landholder, that can be the project proponent. We haven't said it's got to be a suitably qualified person, because what's not to say that the landholder who really is very familiar with their landscape isn't that suitably qualified person with the ideas of actually how to go about doing it. Ultimately, I'd say it's probably a collaboration between the landholder and the project developer.
Yep.
To kind of come up with what goes into the Grazing Land Management Plan. But we haven't restricted it at all. It's any activity that's got a reasonable chance to increase ground cover, within the boundaries of your project.
And it's important because it matches both the ethos. And one is that we're measuring the outcome, not the input. And 2, it's a voluntary carrot-driven market, right? So we should be encouraging both of those. Julia, I don't think you can run away from this one. Let's put forward a question that says, do you see a future where the supply chain mandates farmers to improve their practices and reduce environmental risk and improve environmental outcomes? Do crediting schemes, now that we have these available as measurement tools, are they going to be used more or less? The one that sticks out there is mandates.
Well, Meat and Livestock Australia is an apolitical body, and I won't speculate there. Certainly no signal, and also no intent behind our participation here. I think what we want to see is a broadening of voluntary opportunities where a market incentive can encourage producers who are already managing, like I said, more than 50% of Australia's land mass, to explore practices where they can ideally get a win-win benefit for production, for water quality. And if there's some players who see value in credits on top of that, then fantastic.
100% agree. Even in a mandated market, there is still, or a pseudo mandate, take offsets. It's your choice to use credits. If you don't use credits, you can use another mechanism, right? So the real stick of having a mandate that says you must, I don't think that's going to sit very well with farmers. I can see that supply chains might become more aware of their environmental footprint, and we have had discussions with investors who are interested in improving the overall environmental performance of their portfolio. So, a farmer may get pressure from various points, but our market is voluntary. You should participate because you want to. Go ahead, Julia, jump in.
Just one more comment that answers a question or touches on a question from Sue about who are the buyers. The buyers of, or the interested buyers of credits under the REEF scheme and with the other projects that EcoMarkets administrates to date, you'll see they are not from within the agricultural industry. Typically, they are other players who are looking to the land-based sector to provide some of these credits or ESG related products to them. So I think really I see us, the red meat sector, as a supporting partner to goals that diverse parts of the economy might be looking for, and we can help provide those.
Yep. And you will see that, Julia, from our marketplace as well. I mean, 99% of credits are sold to non-government, right? That's a good start. But the major buyers are going to be corporates who have that desire to want to make a contribution back by measuring an outcome rather than an activity. So ESG, those sorts of things. Yeah, I agree. So that brings us 5 minutes over time. I apologise for those who had to hang around beyond, but we have addressed all the questions, thankfully, apart from some of the highly technical specific ones, which we'll address offline. Amy, I might just hand back to you, seeing as though you've done most of the work for EcoMarkets to get this going, so you can sign off.
Thanks so much, Goz, Andrew, Julia. It's been a pleasure. It's a great outcome to see this new Grazing Land Management methodology approved under the Acwis, now applicable throughout Australia. And if there is intent for its use outside Australia, being New Zealand or the Pacific, etc., please hit up Verterra. There's always opportunities to expand and scale. I think the biggest thing to take away from here is that we have a real opportunity with support from the Meat and Livestock Australia. Really appreciate their involvement in this partnership. It's a fantastic outcome for the scheme, and I'm really excited to see where it goes. So keep in touch. Thanks so much for your time, and everyone have a fantastic afternoon. See ya.